for still being with us. Thank you for our panelists for joining. We had a very interesting first two sessions this morning with strong statements at the political level from both the German government and the EU institutions. It was then followed by a session at director level, during which we also heard a strong commitment from EU institutions to make this new agenda a reality for the European Union. So a lot of hope and many expectations have been raised in the last 2 hours. And now with our distinguished speakers, we will try to see to what extent this hope can really become a reality in terms of partnerships that the European Union can develop with implementing partners, but also given the variety and diversity of stakeholders in the European Union, the conditions under which international engagement can work and can provide the results. So to discuss these questions with us in this session, we will have 3 speakers. First, Valery Freland, who is director at the ALIPH Foundation, the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas. Gitte Zschoch, director of EUNIC Global, the European Union National Institutes for Culture Network. Hello, Gitte, thanks for being with us. And Tandon Aparna, who is joining us from India. She's senior program leader at ICROM, the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property, usually based in Rome. Thank you, Aparna, for being with us. As in the previous session, we will start with a round of questions to our panelists, who will each have 4 minutes to answer each of them. I will ask you to please respect the time so that we do have enough time to then open the floor to questions. In the previous sessions, we had very numerous questions and very interesting ones. So it would be really good if we could have enough time to listen or read them and then exchange together with you and them. I will first start with Valery, but before this, just a note in terms of asking questions for participants. In Zoom, there are 2 functions that are at your disposal. One is the chat function, where you can see one little bubble. And this is for everybody. So here you can put information that you would like to share. You can put comments. But if you really want to ask and address questions to our panelists, we would like to encourage you to use the second function, which is the Q&A function. The title might be a little bit different depending on the languages you use on your software. But please do try to use the Q&A bubbles. And here you have 2 bubbles as a symbol, as an icon, to ask your questions. It will be easier for us as facilitators and organizers to read your questions and to extract them from the flow of information that is being shared on the chat box. So apart from this little technical note, I would like now to turn to Valery with my first question. Could you tell us a bit about ALIPH and your approach to cultural heritage protection in conflict and crisis, so that we understand your work, what you do, and also the specificity of ALIPH? Thank you very much. I will then show a little video. We will launch a video after your statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damien. So can you hear me?
Very
yes?
Well.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting ALIPH, and thank you all of you for being with us today. And congratulations to the organizers. I know that it has been hard work, so congratulations. So ALIPH was created in 2017 at the initiative of France and the Emirates in Geneva in order to contribute to the protection of cultural heritage in conflict or post-conflict areas. And so, we are a very young international organization. We are both a foundation and an international organization, thanks to the headquarters agreement that we signed with Swiss in 2017. So Our main objective is to contribute to protect cultural heritage to build peace. And I'm very pleased to see that it is an objective that is shared by many people today. Because beyond stone, there are people. We all know that for the past 20 years, all cultural heritage has become a target of war, a weapon of war, and also the collateral victim of the fight against terrorism. At the same time, we do believe at ALIPH that cultural heritage protection is a means of economic and social development, sustainable development, resilience, humanitarian aid, and therefore peace building. But I'm sure that we have the opportunity to get back to this point later. So to implement this objective, we have developed an approach that can be summed up in 3 words: action, reaction, population. Our motto indeed is action, action, action. Maybe because, you know, the chair of ALIPH is a philanthropist, but also a businessman. So what does it mean? It means that our priority is to focus on concrete projects on the ground. For 2 years, we have been financing more than 100 projects, concrete projects in 22 countries to protect or rehabilitate cultural heritage. And we pay attention to select projects that include interventions in the field. So that means that we develop an integrated approach combining 4 dimensions: concrete protection measures on the ground, capacity building, awareness raising, and community involvement. Of course, that's an objective, and that's sometimes difficult to gather these 4 dimensions, but that's our reference. Our second objective is reaction, or to say it in a better English, our responsiveness. A part of our action is to finance emergency measures to fund cultural heritage firemen or first aid. For instance, this summer, just after the blast in Beirut, we launched an action plan of $5 million to protect and rehabilitate the cultural heritage of Beirut damaged by the explosion. That means that today we have committed more than $2 million to stabilize historic houses or to rehabilitate museums, libraries, and so on. And I must confess that we are able to do it for 3 reasons. We have available funds. In 2 years, ALIPH has gathered the $80 million pledges of its funders. We set up emergency relief procedures that allow us to be very responsive, able to support project proposals very quickly. And the governance of our foundation is very agile. Our governance body are very responsive, and the secretariat, I run a secretariat of 10 people, which is, you know, a very modest structure, is managed as a startup mode. Last but not least, our objective is to be as close as possible of local population and local communities. And once again, it's an objective which is shared by many people today. So we are strongly committed to work for and with local communities. Heritage can only be sustainably preserved if communities are directly involved in the project. This is essential for the acceptance and sustainability of this project. But this can be a major challenge, we must say it, in certain regions that are in conflict or emerging from conflict, where communities, civil society, and local authorities are struggling to rebuild themselves. So let me give you 2 examples of what we do. For instance, we finance the project of the rehabilitation of the Tomb of Aska, which is just behind me, in Mali. We do it with the Ministry of Culture of Mali and a French association, Gitte, which is specialized in earthen architecture. So to involve local communities, we set up a steering committee, which is in charge of the management of the project. And it's a way to make people work and talk together. Second example, last April, we launched an initiative to help 100 local operators overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's a way to, I would say, with very small amount of money, you know, under 15,000 USD. But it's a way to, when you protect these local actors today, it's a way to protect cultural heritage in the long term. So once again, the key words of our mission are concrete action on the ground, responsiveness, population and communities, and peace building. That's our motto. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you, Valery, very much for being very concise and to the point, and also selecting key messages for this first statement. That's exactly the purpose of this first question. We will now launch the video that you are accepted very kindly to share with us. So I will ask our colleague Miguel if you could please launch the video. Thank you.
Spiegate che succede?
Found something important.
Cioè?
Rowaid found a piece which could match the big mask which was destroyed by Daesh.
When you found this?
Just now.
Okay. So
let us try to put it back. Okay. Moment of suspense. Ta-da.
oh Dio!
It is.
Oh God!
Perfect.
No,
the mask is coming out.
Complimenti, congratulations. Davvero, è perfettamente come faceva. Questo significa che sarà
possibile restaurare.
Perfetto.
Thank you for sharing this video. Very short, but also very moving, I would say, and very concrete. So it gives, I think, a very good idea of the kind of type of work that you do at ALIPH. We will get back to you, Valery, to continue the debate. I will now turn to Gitte Zschoch, Director of EUNIC Global. Thanks, Gitte, for being with us. Could you tell us a bit about your approach at EUNIC to cultural heritage in fragile contexts?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to see that broad political engagement on the topic, culture, cultural heritage, and conflict. So we are the network of EU National Institutes for Culture, meaning those organizations from EU member states that traditionally deal with cultural relations, meaning cultural exchange, cultural cooperation with communities, artists, partners in partner countries. And our members have decades-long experiences of working in cultural relations in countries like Jordan, Syria, and Afghanistan, and others, sometimes more than 50 or 60 years. And they are ingrained in these societies, having established offices there. Of course, in times of conflict, it becomes difficult, but at least in neighboring countries, our members are present. Cultural heritage has been a part of our portfolio since always, especially maybe with a focus on intangible heritage and also contested heritage, maybe not so much protection of heritage, even though some of our members have dedicated programs on that as well. It depends a little bit on how that is structured within the EU member states. But in general, I mean, our understanding of cultural relations is quite broad. So it would include cultural heritage, but it also includes culture and development, tourism, that's been mentioned today as well, but also a very traditional understanding of arts, yet also civil engagement. And well, what can be the specific assets that a cultural relations network brings to the table with experience in the area of culture in the wider sense? Well, I think one, our the answer lies in what we have at our core of our vision, which is bringing together the foreign affairs and the cultural approach. Culture, in our understanding, needs to be one of the pillars of any strategy of external action. And some of the EU member states have already realized that, which is why this is, we have members actually from all EU member states. And I think the EU as such, in a joint approach, can even more capitalize on that fact that it recognizes culture in foreign relations, and especially with cultural heritage, as Louise Huxthausen has also said in the panel just before us. So raising the awareness also of a shared cultural heritage. But in the broader sense as well, that this engagement in culture is part of the whole package of external relations. Our work specifically in fragile context, and we defined this as geopolitically fragile, but also environmentally fragile, but fragile in any sense, any sort of conflict or crisis-ridden area became apparent when we did a workshop in Cyprus last year, when we invited our members, but also colleagues from EU delegations to look at our work in specific countries, such as Libya, but also Colombia, Afghanistan, Mali was present as well. And what became apparent was that not all of our work in fragile context is cultural heritage, but some is. But in all this broader portfolio, what was interesting was that we shared, or the projects shared the same goals: promoting social cohesion in societies, local empowerment, that's something that's been mentioned several times also today already, and sustainable development through culture. So it was clear that this approach of cultural relations and cultural heritage in specific brings a lot to peace-building processes, conflict prevention and recovery, and building resilient societies. And there's more as well. We have looked at examples of our members also stretching into protecting artists, protecting artistic creation, and then also creating tolerance and understanding through debate and dialogue, which I think is also important when we say that, you know, it's a society that decides what cultural heritage means for that society, but that also needs enabling a sort of discourse on that and a debate. I think when it comes to building resilient societies and any work in fragile contexts, our main takeaway from this workshop and bringing together all of these experiences in a report that we published, that I have here and which is available on our website, is that it's to include local organizations, something that's been said before, in the planning and in the delivery of any activity. And that doesn't just mean of giving specific tasks to local organizations, but including them from the beginning and giving ownership to them as well. Otherwise, effects are short-lived and might even backfire. And these are values that are true in our work in general. This is the cultural relations approach that also was defined by the EU in the strategy on cultural relations, which was mentioned before. I'm ending my time slot.
Yes.
One more thing that I would like to mention, because what we have discovered is that there is a lot of potential, but that we lack evidence. And so one of the outcomes of this workshop was that we are engaging now in, or we've actually just launched a call for evidence-based research, where we ask what can be the specific asset or the outcomes that cultural relations and cultural heritage in particular bring to working in fragile contexts towards conflict prevention and resolution.
Thank you for the last piece of information, and also your considerations on how you see at EUNIC like how to engage in fragile context and how you define it. I find that very interesting. This panel is very diverse. We have ALIPH, which is a very sui generis international organization with alliances of various stakeholders. We have EUNIC network with several dozens of staff all around behalf of member states, agencies, and we have ECROM. So I think it gives also the audience a good idea of the diversity of options for the European Union to engage in various partnerships to ensure that this cultural heritage protection agenda can become concrete. So without further ado, we will turn to a third organization, which is also working in this field. Aparna Tandon will tell us about the ICROM's approach to cultural heritage protection in conflict and crisis zones. And we'll learn also from the specificity of your approach. Aparna, the floor is yours. You have 4 minutes for this first question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I thank the organizers for inviting ICROM, and on behalf of ICROM, I'm very happy to join this meeting. It's been very inspiring so far. The ICROM motto for working in conflict settings is "Culture cannot wait." And that means that the need to protect individual and collective identities and the ways of living and ties to one's root can be so strong that even in amidst violent conflicts, people can go to great lengths to protect or lay claim to heritage. So ICROM approach embraces the principle of do no harm, using cultural heritage protection in crises as a force for building peace, resilience, and development. So it's very much converges with what the previous speakers have said. The understanding of what peace means to communities on day-to-day basis, however, can be very different. And what is the interplay of cultural heritage with conflict is fundamental to ICROM's action in war zones. Since 2010, when ICROM launched its pioneering international training on first aid to cultural heritage in times of conflict, the focus of the organization has been on providing tools as well as training to professionals who are embedded in their own local context. So that's the difference, I think, where the expertise must come from the people who are living in these areas. And these professionals are drawn from fields of cultural heritage, humanitarian aid, peace building, disaster risk reduction, and security. The aim is to use heritage to engage alienated populations to build trust, because trust is the first thing that gets lost in protracted conflict situations or fragile settings. So based on years of experience, ICROM has developed multilingual guidance on first aid to cultural heritage for all types, for tangible and intangible heritage. And most recently, it was used by professionals in Lebanon, in Beirut, and in the aftermath of the floods in Yemen. So this capacity building of ICROM also extends to in-crisis training. Considering that all responses for protection of cultural heritage and their associated communities have to be local, ICROM's action is aimed at enhancing local capacities and seeking better integration of heritage protection with humanitarian aid, security, peace building, and development. Therefore, for example, our training is also complemented with field projects. I would like to give one example here quickly. In Syria, an ICROM training, trainee, Ayas Abras, who's a WASH officer in UNICEF, is building a small team of cultural first aiders to assist with documentation and recovery of historic houses in Aleppo. Post-training, he received a seed grant from ICROM and Swedish Postcode Foundation to train local youth in recovering heritage and promoting risk reduction, as well as intercommunal harmony. Similarly, another ICROM trainee, Meghna Goel, who works with Save the Children, is working with Rohingya refugees in India to document their living heritage through videos and illustrated books, combining it with psychosocial first aid in an attempt to heal traumatized communities. So the other important aspect of ICROM approach is to provide simple but practical tools to practitioners and decision makers, which will enable them to enhance the peace building potential of heritage recovery or sustaining heritage in conflict settings. With the support of Principality of Monaco, for example, we are field testing a toolkit in collaboration with researchers and practitioners, which will help professionals and grant-making agencies to understand if their heritage recovery projects could have unintended outcomes that could lead to heightened tensions. It uses heritage-centric conflict analysis to provide a qualitative conflict risk estimation. So we are very excited about this. So we hope that soon we'll be able to field test it more widely. A part of this toolkit will also focus on how project design can be altered to include peace building outcomes.
Right.
And so I guess these are some of the broad initiatives that we are taking. And we are also looking at now working with ALIPH Foundation on building communities resilience and looking at intersecting risks such as disasters, conflicts, and health crises. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Aparna, for these explanations and descriptions of very concrete initiatives. I find it very interesting that we see a link between the macro level talks of the previous session and the micro level of all your interventions. And I think one of the challenges for the EU usually is to find intermediary organizations that connect the ground level micro intervention with their huge, gigantic initiative. So I think we should probably also focus our session on that, and probably your organizations have some ability to address that type of challenge. You also mentioned trust, which is obviously a key word that had not come up yet in our conference. I would like to now go with a second round of questions, also encouraging our audience to put their question in the Q&A to prepare for the debate that we will open right after the second round of questions. So first, Valery, again, could you now be a bit more specific about how you see ALIPH actions and intervention in terms of benefits potentially for the EU? That would be very interesting to hear you on this.
Yes. Thank you, Damien, for this second question. And I'm very pleased to be here with Aparna because we have been working so well for a couple of months now, and we are very pleased with this partnership we have with ICROM, which is exactly what we are looking for. I mean, a project where we contribute to the capacity building of local communities, but also we contribute to some concrete projects in the field, which is always very interesting to have. So first and foremost, let me just give you my personal feeling regarding one point. I do think that the European Union should invest more in cultural heritage protection in Europe and abroad, because I do think that there is a strong link between economic and social development and peace building and cultural heritage. And also because it's also a way in our villages in Europe and also abroad to show what is Europe and what Europe is able to do. It gives visibility to Europe through concrete projects. That's my first statement. Second point I wanted to mention, I'm sure, and because I've been working on European affairs for many years, I'm sure that ALIPH could be a potential partner for the EU in the field of cultural heritage protection, because ALIPH is a new form of multilateralism. I call it a multilateralism of project, complementary to other international organizations in this field, UNESCO and ICROM, and we have strong partnership with both of them. So what can we provide to the EU? First, I already mentioned that ALIPH has demonstrated for 2 years its ability to act, its agility, and its responsiveness. So even if, of course, we must remain very modest, and we have the patience of the youth. Beyond this, ALIPH can provide a high-level expertise, both on cultural heritage protection and conflict zone, thanks to the experience of the members of our different bodies. Let me just mention that the president of our scientific committee is the president of the Louvre Museum. We also established in 2 years, thanks to some partnership we have, including with ICROM, UNESCO, and so on, a large network of international and local partners, NGOs, cultural institutions, with the goal, and I'm very pleased to see that we share the same goal, UNESCO and us, with the goal of breaking down barriers between sector, between cultural heritage, diplomacy, development aid, security. We all need to work together. And through our COVID-19 action plan, we have been in touch with dozens of local NGOs worldwide. ALIPH also guarantees low operating costs. And I do think that in the current budgetary context, it's also important to mention it. 90% of our funds go directly to projects. That is to say that our operating costs are less than 10% of the committed fund. So how could ALIPH work with the EU? We could first consider co-financing together heritage protection projects in countries in conflict or in post-conflict areas, which are important for the EU and for ALIPH, such as Mali, Iraq, and so on. But also, for instance, in their neighborhood countries, in the Balkans, ALIPH finances the rehabilitation of the Museum of Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. ALIPH could also be the recipient of European funding and contribute to the implementation of the EU's external policy, among other actors. And the EU could become an ALIPH board members with voting rights. It will be a way for EU to contribute to our strategy. In any case, investing in ALIPH has an exponential leverage effect, because when you put in €1 to support us, it encourages other ALIPH board members to increase their contribution as well. So to conclude, I'm convinced that the EU must invest more in the cultural heritage of conflict and post-conflict zones, and that ALIPH could become one of its partners. I would be very pleased to strengthen our link with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Valery. This is very clear, and you have made the case that is also very clear. I find it interesting that we discuss the variety of formats of your respective organizations and what are the solutions to agility. We will ask now the question to Gitte. I also would like to make a personal remark. I think what I find very interesting also in EUNIC is the fact that because of the presence of many EUNIC members all around the world, the teams are composed of a mix of European and partner countries staff. And when we said we engage local communities, also there is a lot of potential to benefit from the knowledge of staff we work with. And I think ALIPH also is a good example of a mix. So this mix is probably present in all of your 3 organizations. Gitte, how do you see the future in terms of EU engagement, both in terms of opportunities and challenges? How can member states, governments, EUNIC agency coordinate to ensure that this agenda is moving forward? What is your understanding and analysis?
Well, I think what we found when we took that first analysis of action that is already existing, especially together with colleagues from EU delegations, is that we need better coordination on the issue. I think when you look at coordination in other areas of, for example, development cooperation, health sector, for instance, or water sectors, generally there's a sort of a joint approach of all the actors in a specific country. But for culture, and I'm using here culture in the more general terms, this doesn't exist. It's not part of it's not that pillar, of external action that it should be, that I called for also in my first intervention. So we need to establish a practice of working together on country level, for instance, in culture. And I think the difficulty is already sort of ingrained in our network, as culture is the mandate of the EU member states. And so it's also solved in a way very differently from EU member state to EU member state, meaning that some have a relatively independent organization on the ground, working at an arm's length approach to embassies in that case, and some are directly embassies. And so there's an overlap that can be very productively, I think, put into effect, because that also means that these more or less independent cultural institutes on the ground are also very much connected, as you said, because of the bi-national teams and so on. They're very much connected to local cultural scenes. But it makes it a bit more difficult to coordinate, for example, for a head of delegation of the EU, of an EU embassy, because of this not 100% congruence. But I think also what we've seen is that there needs to be more investment. I would second what Valery said. More awareness of what culture and cultural heritage can bring to peaceful relationships. And trust was mentioned, trust and understanding through culture. That's our motto as EUNIC. And so there's a lot of potential, and I think we need to become better at using that potential. I also think it's very difficult to coordinate, especially in fragile contexts, because of the security implications. It's very expensive to work in security fragile areas. It's often, like in Libya, was mentioned in the chat, not really possible to have offices. So then you work from neighboring countries. Then it's not clear who's responsible for that country. It's not, for example, Jordan works in Yemen, but it's not that all EU member states have a big enough presence in Jordan to also cover Yemen. So there's a lack of funding, lack of staff, also difficult coordination. What I'm happy to see is now, I think we weren't aware of that so much in November last year, that there is this political will. I find it a bit pitiable that we need these crises and we need terrorists to show us what kind of value cultural heritage has and culture has in general. But okay, I accept it now that we've realized this potential, and I think this conference is also one of the symbols of it. Let's move forward together and let's strengthen our joint action in these areas.
Thank you, Gitte, for your candid assessment. I think it's also very useful to point at the challenges and what has to change, or what are the possibilities or opportunities to seize to ensure that implementation is effective, is efficient, and yields the results that we are all looking for. Aparna, on your side, could you maybe elaborate on some experience that you've had and that could perhaps be a source of inspiration for some partnership with the EU in the future?
Thank you. Actually, I'm just going to endorse what the previous two, the co-panelists have emphasized. I think one of the big problems that ICROM has kind of spotted by its action on the ground is that culture is not part of cultural heritage, or culture is not part of the international humanitarian aid and cluster system, the UN cluster system. That makes coordination on the ground really, really impossible. So while we have a clear policy line emerging, we do not have role delineation, we do not have coordination mechanisms in place. So the mechanisms have to actually start right from maybe UNESCO and some other agencies like ICROM, ICOM, and then ground NGOs have to be put in place. So there is really no capacity to speak of. And you cannot ask other sectors to take the burden of something which they're already struggling with. So you can't ask the humanitarian aid sector to take it on by themselves. So really, we need to put, let's say we need to walk the talk. And walk the talk means more investment in, first of all, creating the alliances like what ICROM has been trying to build of professionals and giving them due recognition so that they can act and intervene legitimately in times of crisis, and that they are recognized as actors. So this whole idea of cultural first aiders is a very important idea, and it needs legitimacy, and they need to be recognized and seen and heard. The other aspect is youth networks and creating more multilingual training opportunities, as well as investing more in guidance and tools. So all this comes together, I think, and I think there is a great opportunity for ICROM to work with the European Union and other civil protection, other organizations, as well as ALIPH, UNESCO, to build meaningful alliances. But definitely, I think that there is a need for making more direct partnerships between ICROM and European Union in order to expand and escalate, in a way, develop a more flatter network of professionals, so that we can really come up with the capacity that we need. We are already working with the European Civil Protection Organization to embed cultural heritage in civil protection responses. And that is for all countries participating in European civil protection mechanism. But for fragile settings, we'll need something similar. And I'm very happy to say that ALIPH has expressed faith in ICCROM's ability to do something like this in MENAP region, but this needs to be upscaled. So that's all I will say.
Okay.
More investment and more support for developing, tailored solutions, for conducting applied research, for building alliances, and yes, and developing coordination mechanisms, identifying roles, giving roles to organizations, and setting up that whole system, even if you don't want to create a cluster on culture. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Aparna, and the three of you for giving more details about how you see potential partnerships. We're now going to open the floor to the questions that have been asked since the beginning of the session. And we are picking up one that is not an easy one, but that we consider as very important. This is a question by Wajdan Majid, who is British Iraqi archaeologist. The question is a bit long, but we'll try to summarize it as follows. We've been mentioning communities as the solutions, or the main owners of the solution, and also of cultural heritage, might it be tangible and intangible. How do we ensure that international intervention from the European Union, for instance, or international partners, that the resources go to the right people, that the resources actually reach those who are aligned with the EU or the international partners' agenda, knowing the complexity of the local context, especially in conflict settings, knowing the politics around cultural heritage, and all the tensions and the conflict factors that exist. These are points that have made very clear in the background study that was commissioned by the European Union for this conference on Iraq in particular. So what is the good practice? What are the lessons that you have drawn about how to ensure that the money goes to the right hands, to ensure that the good work is done? And sorry, Mr. Wajid, if I have summarized or rephrased your question. I hope you will not be too frustrated about this. So who would like to start addressing this first question? Valery, Gitte, or Aparna? Valery? Okay. And then Aparna, I think you would like to.
Just a few words. It is true that it is a very key question. It is true that working in conflict zone, it's going out our comfort zone, for sure. So that means that we need to pay attention to many issues. And among them, there is sometimes the risk of corruption, like in many countries, actually. So to face this issue at ALIPH, we develop two actions. First, we always have a due diligence of each interlocutor, each operator we work with. And it's a way to better know them and to be sure that we'll have a transparency and a transparency financial circuit. And the second one is that we need to build trustful relationship with actors, which takes time. And so that's the reason we need to have, a very flexible approach of all these kind of actors. And that's the reason why, for instance, we try to work very closely and to know them better with local operators through our action plan against COVID-19, but also through conferences, small working group or meeting we have with them, like we organized in Barcelona 8 months ago with actors from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and so on. It's just, we need to build trustful relationship with all all these potential partners. So due diligence and a trustful relationship.
Okay, thank you, Valery. I think Aparna, you wanted to also react.
Yes, I basically just three strategies that we have been consistently using, and actually they have really helped. One strategy is that people do not value cultural heritage the way experts value cultural heritage. So there has been a lot already been said about tangible, intangible. In a sense, all heritage is intangible. So as long as we understand what are the differences on the ground, if we are looking at it from a perspective of a cultural heritage aspect or religious heritage aspect from that aspect. So we have to understand different interests and different stakes. And again, this is not a matter of only cultural heritage people. It's also a matter of anthropologists, people who deal with negotiation, mediations, people who are finding somebody in the society, community elders, and using them as interlocutors, or people who have, who enjoy the trust in one aspect, they can be used. So these are some of the strategies that we use also in our training, but we also give these kind of soft skills to people to understand that you yourself are biased. There is no bad, no dark, no good or bad. There are shades of gray. So how do you deal with that? And that means also working with non-state actors. I think that has not been touched or, has been skirted around. And yes, to what extent? So that's why what we are experimenting with is also looking at how do you make these approaches come together, and also look at, where do you draw a line? Where, how far do you take the humanitarian principles and juxtapose them on, or use them for cultural heritage? And to what extent are you, as it is when you're trying to save cultural heritage, you're prioritizing one over another? So whose identity you're trying to save? So if all those questions are somehow well understood, nuances can be, understood, and this way trust could be built. I hope I tried to explain some of them.
Thanks. It certainly helps, I think, to address this very complex question that can be applied in many different contexts. Gitte, would you like to react to this question, or would you prefer to wait for the next ones?
Very briefly, I think it's very wise what my two co-panelists have been saying. And I think for European organizations, it means to be there, to be on the ground, so that you can build these relationships of trust. I think the danger lies in prescribing medicine from Brussels or from the capitals of the EU, but it's like being there. I think it's extremely hard, as Valery has also said. And I think also building these relationships with civil society organizations, it does take time, and sometimes there is no time. But I think it's, being there and getting to know each other, I think would be the key. And I also sometimes wonder, when I looked at my own experience in a country like the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, like amounts of money can do harm sometimes as well. If the budgets that are being poured into programs are too large, then you have like a landscape of organizations, local organizations that also are created in order to absorb that money. And so it doesn't necessarily go into those actors that already have the expertise. And so I think I've seen this in an earlier comment as well. I think there was Europa Nostra saying, we need smaller, we need to make the project smaller in a way. And I think there's truth to that as well. I think the cultural sector is particular, it's also in Europe, but also outside of Europe, it's very diverse, and small amounts of money can go a long way. And so I think that needs to be taken into account also on EU level and on our own level.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing these comments and also experience. We are going to couple two questions coming from Mrs. Dita Limova from the Ministry of Culture of Czech Republic and Lorika Hisari. I'm not sure which position we can relate this person to from the question box, but we would like to ask you if you could share examples of concrete projects and initiatives in the region of the Western Balkans. And secondly, to be a little bit more specific in envisaging the concrete ways to actually foster cooperation, because Mrs. Limova was saying, it has been said several times that we need closer cooperation, but what specifically can we do about it? Is there any manual? Is there any guideline that we can follow to be involved in cultural heritage protection initiatives? Who would like to start? Aparna?
Okay, no, I was just thinking about the answers. Well, about the cooperation, if I believe between sectors, right? This was about between sectors, right? Cooperation between sectors, this question.
And probably my interpretation is probably also about among Europeans and between sectors, both. Among
Europeans and between sectors. Well, I think, first of all, the first aspect, as I already highlighted, is to understand what is the, actor landscape looking like. So this conference has been a very good platform to understand, who are the people who are involved, but there might be many, many others. And then the other aspect is that there is no set formula, in the sense of the mechanisms that we have said are not there right now. If we are talking about a certain phase, let's say conflict prevention, then which are the agencies that are really, really working on the ground that needs to be really a work that needs to be created? And which are so all phases, we need to understand which agency, which cultural heritage agency specializes in that. And that's not a work that has been done. So all what we have been doing is, at ICROM level, we have tried to bring out some guidelines. We are developing common guidelines with the, civil protection, search and rescue, military guidelines are already existing with the UNESCO. So it's between different actors and different types of, sectors that we are trying to develop these mechanisms with, but they're not there. We only have examples in form of good practices. And as a result of our training and the seed projects that I mentioned, now we have a good number of examples to show. And one of them is in the Balkans, not really, in the sense like there's a network that has been created, Be Care, which is from of young cultural first aiders, developed by Cultural Heritage Without Borders. And this was followed by our training. And the idea was to bring all these countries together and have a common youth network for responding to cultural emergencies. So I hope that answers.
Excellent. I'm sorry I rushed you into answering the question, Aparna, but I think you did extremely well. It's interesting that we have been using the word communities in different senses since the beginning of the conference. Local communities, expertise communities, specialists. And I think we have not mentioned the word the communities of practice, but I think it is emerging from the talk that we are having now. Gitte, I think I saw you waving, and please, the floor is yours.
Yes, if I may just add, I have been also thinking about answers to these two questions. Regarding Western Balkans, I think it's important to point out that when we talk about cultural heritage, conflict prevention, or building resilient societies, peace building through cultural heritage, that we don't only look at certain countries that come to mind first. So I already appreciate the mentioning of these European countries in the Western Balkans. One project that comes to my mind is the Cultural Management Academy, which is a project by our members being set up in different countries in the EU and outside of the EU in that area. I think currently it's sort of rooted in Romania. And during the European Year of Cultural Heritage, they also had a specific sort of module on cultural heritage. And that brings me to also mentioning that, cultural heritage and the protection of it, I mean, it's a huge topic, and I think it does call for multilateral action, especially when we also think about contested heritage, which is also shared heritage, so contested heritage as Europe in the world, but also as Europe within each other and within countries. And I'm only thinking about restitution and objects that are in museums of Europe and that have a relationship to countries in the world that we've dealt with in the past, also violently. And I think it's interesting that there is not yet a multilateral approach, or maybe not as strong as it could be on this within the EU. So a call for that as well. Then how do we do that? I would always say use what's already there, use the networks that are already there and strengthen them and give them the mandate to deal with these topics. I mean, I am a representative of a network, and so that is also in the nature of my work to say that. But I mean, EUNIC members do bring together a lot of experience on the ground in culture, in the broader sense, cultural relations, in cultural heritage in the particular sense. There's initiatives like ALIPH. I mean, there's the Global Heritage Alliance that can also be drawn in on this. And there's the EU and the Council of the EU with the different configurations. There's inter-service groups on culture within the different EU services. And so it's there, these, it's not necessarily a manual, but structures of exchange are there, and they can be used in a better way and also really strengthened, and the mandate could be given to these organizations or networks to deal with certain topics.
Thanks. So there's a lot, probably too much to grasp in just one morning or afternoon, and indeed it's a jungle of actors and stakeholders and potential allies. We mentioned the word alliances, and indeed how do alliances cross over and how to make them as fruitful as possible within Europe and between Europeans and partners outside Europe. Valery, please give us your perspective on this.
Yes, just maybe to conclude on my side on the link between ALIPH and the EU, including the EU neighborhood. First, we, of course, and hopefully, the EU is not a conflict area, but we already intervene in EU, in a European country, because we wanted to express our solidarity, for instance, with Croatia after the earthquake a couple of months ago. And so we helped a very small project. We found a very small project of the rehabilitation of a place of worship, because it was also a symbol, this place of worship, of the past conflict. Second, we work with many countries from which are member states of the Council of Europe. We already work with Georgia. We work in Albania, where we finance also a small project in the framework of our action plan against COVID-19. We work, I already mentioned it, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we are ready to work with European countries, because past conflict led their stigmas in the big Europe. And third, once again, I hope that we'll be able to develop strong links between ALIPH and the EU in the coming months. But I also hope that more European countries will be eager to join ALIPH. At ALIPH, we have 7 member states. 2 are European, France and Luxembourg. And definitely, I do think that ALIPH could be also a place where we could discuss and we could contribute all together to a strategy, a deeper strategy on how to face how to protect cultural heritage in conflict or post-conflict areas.
Okay, thank you very much, Valery. We will end this session in close to 15 minutes. And we still have a number of questions that are coming in and that we would like to share with you. The first question is from Paolo Vitti, researcher, about the connection between climate change and cultural heritage protection. And the question is, could you give us examples of ongoing projects that are working on this connection? Second question from Gertjan Pletz, professor in heritage and history, about the academic contribution to this new movement that we are all in today, following the EU policy initiatives. Basically, the question is, how can academics help, and what do policymakers need in terms of information? What do they want us to provide so that we can contribute to these efforts? Who would like to start?
I could speak on climate action aspect of it. May I? Okay, great. Thank you, Professor Vitti, for asking that question. And in fact, I kind of just briefly outlined, we are now undertaking a project with ALIPH on intersecting risks and overlapping risks. And obviously, climate change is one of the drivers, and especially when it comes to natural resources and enhancing the conflict risk, as we have seen in many countries. So one of the key topics, and this is again, it is about discovering right now. It's not really set, but what we are trying to do is that we recently came up with we tested it in Upper Racha in Georgia, which is next to Russian Federation, an area which is also vulnerable to conflict risk, and at the same time is experiencing climate change. And there we worked with the local communities to understand how cultural heritage is is like kind of giving capacities both for sustainable development as well as sustainable as well as climate action, and how by neglecting cultural heritage. So the game is already out, but we'll be playing variants of this game in many parts with Red Cross workers and with many other rural communities, just to understand how cultural and natural resources as they were managed in past, and what has changed and how that is leading to changes is in making populations more vulnerable to the risks induced by climate change. So that's one aspect of it, but we are also doing more research in this area in form of field projects, where we are looking at the overlapping of, like, for example, we just carried out a desk study on in a World Heritage Site in India, in West Bengal, where after the cyclone, landless people who have vital knowledge about sustaining the wetlands are being not taken care of. And we were working with the local NGOs and humanitarian organizations to make sure that their knowledge is taken into account for recovery. So field studies like these are very important. And that's what I was saying earlier, that we need more of this kind of research and investment in this kind of research. It doesn't happen by itself. It has to be multi-sectoral research. It has to be applied research, and it has to take us to communities who are the knowledge bearers.
Yeah, thank you. This could perhaps be a point taken back to the first session, when I remember Mrs. Geiger from DEFCO was saying that DEFCO was doing actually very little research, but mostly focusing on evaluation. So I think it connects the dots in a way. Valery and Gitte, who would like to take the floor first to address those two questions about academic contribution and climate change linkages? Gitte?
Okay, I'll be very brief. I also replied to that question directly in writing, because there is a huge gap sort of for evidence-based research, and we know that this is what helps. I mean, you can go around and say we found that this and that is a very productive approach, and that is something that policy makers often require. And so we've just published a call for research proposals on this very specific aspect of what cultural relations can bring to conflict and prevention and resolution, of which cultural heritage is a part. And we have other sort of activities where we're trying to bring together academics, practitioners, and policymakers. For example, in our EUNIC Siena Cultural Relations Forum, which is taking place every 2 years, and where we, in the last edition last year, dealt with how to create fair partnerships in working together with communities from all over the world. Because that is also an important aspect and an important value of the EU strategy to international cultural relations. On the aspect of bringing together climate change and cultural heritage, yes, I think there are initiatives and activities on the ground. One that I found interesting was or maybe more awareness of that. I think several of our members are working on this, not necessarily always on cultural heritage, but culture and climate change, for example, together with Prince Claus Fund. And also the British Council Cultural Protection Fund has just actually published a new round of for disaster and climate change preparedness in East Africa. So these are grant schemes that are available and that particularly look at climate action.
So there's a lot of potential resources, and we're taking good points of this. Valery, please.
Just yes, I fully agree with my dear colleagues. When you look at the countries which are in conflict, half of them are threatened by climate change. So there is a strong link between climate change, conflict zones, and their potential consequences on cultural heritage. But it is true that we need more data on that. And so I'm very pleased to see that there are some initiatives, because we need to demonstrate it to our to the political level that there is a strong link between all these issues. And we also need to demonstrate that there is a link between cultural heritage protection and humanitarian aid and peace building. So we need more data, we need more concrete example in this field, and that's something that we'll try to support in the coming months at ALIPH, and maybe we will share our information with our colleagues. Last point, we had this discussion at ALIPH. Should we support projects which are dealing with climate change? And we said yes, if the applicant can demonstrate that there is a link between this climate change and a potential conflict. So for the prevention dimension of our action, we are ready to work on that. And for instance, we will finance different projects regarding the documentation and digitization of sites which are threatened by climate change in Bangladesh, in Mauritania, because they are also in very sensitive area in terms of potential conflict.
All right, thank you both, three of you, for for being so reactive to all the questions. There were many more, but we had to filter and select them. It doesn't mean that they were not interesting, it's just that we are all short of time. We are going to wrap up. I will just make a few points of conclusions. But my first impression is that this session was extremely interesting because we widened the spectrum of the talks, and we see how complex but also rich this field is. Might it be in terms of a variety of definitions? We mentioned communities in various ways. Might it be at all the connections or crossovers between communities of expertise or thematic fields, climate change, humanitarian intervention, the definition of crisis, and we know that there are blurry lines where does crisis stop and end, and conflict stop and end, and back and forth movement. So the notion of resilience perhaps could also be brought in the conversation. The importance of data, knowledge production, conflict analysis, understanding each other, also to avoid making mistakes. That it could be do no harm, but also to ensure that we follow due diligence principles. I think there's a point on which we started to scratch the surface, which is the combination of factors in cultural heritage protection, which is a point that is made by our colleague Mehi Arkatem in our Iraq report, and he will elaborate on this later on today. But in Iraq, we found deliberate destruction as well as neglect of cultural heritage, as well as development-induced disappearance of cultural heritage sometimes. The variety of causes of heritage destruction also are very important to keep in mind. And certainly, maybe the last point is that all these conversations need to continue. They need to continue in different formats, involving a variety of actors to build up different alliances. But certainly what this session has demonstrated is that the EU will not be short of potential partners if it wants to do more in the field of cultural heritage protection in conflict and crisis. The question is how to open the right channels, to build the right bridges between experts and those who want to do more, academics, policymakers, security experts, humanitarian activists or civil society, or just people who would like to contribute to their communities. So thank you so much. I found that this session gave us a lot of food for thought, but also a lot of hope in terms of human commitments and willingness and readiness to contribute. So I think there's a lot of energy getting out of this session, and I would like to thank you for this. I will now would like to invite you to a virtual lunch break. And we will resume our conference at 2 o'clock sharp. Will be as numerous as this morning joining us this afternoon. Continue with some sessions on the security dimensions of this conversation before the last sessions that will take place tomorrow. So bon appétit, and enjoy the break, and see you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.